Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Paul Durrant. I'm from IRENA's Innovation and Technology Centre in Bonn, where I lead the Innovation Strategies and Engagement team. Now, I'm hoping most of you know who IRENA is and what we do, but just in case you don't, the International Renewable Energy Agency, we're an intergovernmental organisation, 160 member countries, and we support our countries and the wider community in transitioning to a sustainable energy future. We serve as the principal platform for international cooperation, as a centre for excellence, as a repository of policy, technology, resource and financial knowledge on renewable energy. Now, our analytical work and our engagement with our member countries generates a lot of what we hope is valuable insights, and we're constantly looking for more ways to share those insights. So that is why today we're launching, as a pilot, a new fortnightly webinar program, which we're calling IRENA Insights. We want to try and provide you with different avenues to give you access to our analytical work from teams across the agency, to try and inform and inspire you in the quest to transform the power and energy sectors. So every other week, presenters from one of IRENA's teams, either alone or perhaps sometimes we've invited guests, will share with you some key insights and findings from recent work. We're trying to offer you insights on the opportunities, trends, best practices, but also the emerging, exciting, innovative solutions that are increasingly available around the world to address various challenges. Now, we're trying to keep these webinars short, circa 30 minutes maximum. So clearly we can't cover everything, but we hope to give you enough to decide whether to delve deeper into that topic, and we'll try to signpost further sources of more in-depth information to help you do that. So we're really looking forward to engaging with you more. We hope you find this approach useful and the topics that we cover interesting. Do please provide us with feedback on this and future webinars so we can judge their value and keep improving them. So with that, let me hand you to my colleague, Martina.
Thank you, Paul. Welcome again. My name is Martina Lyons, and I will be your moderator today. I'm also from the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn, from the Innovation Strategies and Engagement team, and I'm excited to be hosting today's session. Today's first webinar, which is titled Wind and Solar PV, What We Need by 2050, will explore the prominent role of wind and solar PV in accelerating the global energy transition to 2050, based on IRENA's climate resilient pathway, so-called REmap case. Speakers will outline deployment needs in wind and solar in the next 3 decades to achieve the Paris climate goals, and will offer further insights on cost reduction opportunities, technology trends, and the need to prepare electricity grids for these rising shares of variable wind and solar. So I'm pleased to introduce you to today's speakers, Ms. Maisarah Kadir and Ms. Elisa Asmelash, our experts from the IRENA REmap team. Their presentation will be approximately 20 minutes long to allow approximately 10-minute session for questions and answers. But before I hand over the microphone to Maisarah and Elisa, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. So today's webinar will be recorded and available together with the presentation slides on IRENA's webinar website. The link will be shared with you in the follow-up emails within 2 days. All of you are currently muted and will remain so throughout the webinar. We would love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to send it through the questions feature that you can find on the webinar panel and select to all the participants. We will be monitoring your questions throughout the session and select some to be answered by our speakers. But due to time constraints, we apologize in advance if your question is not answered. You may also download the reports on which this presentation is based in the handout section. And if you experience any technical difficulties, please try to reconnect by dialing in via the phone. You can get the number by clicking on the phone option located on the webinar panel. If your technical difficulties remain unresolved, you may write to us through the chat section and we will try to help you. So without any further ado, I would like to kick things off by welcoming our first speaker, Ms. Maisarah Kadir. Maisarah, over to you now.
Thank you, Martina, for the introduction. I will begin with introducing REmap. So what is REmap? REmap is IRENA's Renewable Energy Roadmaps program, which sits under IITC, the IRENA Innovation Technology Center in Bonn, Germany. REmap shows reasonable, feasible, and cost-effective transformational pathways to accelerate renewable energy transformation while looking into a 2030 and 2050 horizon using a bottom-up approach that targets end-use sectors such as power, transport, industry, and buildings. Our areas of implementation covers global level, regional level, and country level, and also thematic level, where we develop a transformative renewable energy pathways beyond the reference case. So for the past 7 years, we have engaged with 70 countries with more than 50 publications and data sets. How we do our REmap methodology is we always start with building a reference case where we look into building a baseline scenario. The reference case is based on national energy plans, targets, and current energy policies in place that covers both renewable energy and non-renewable energy that also includes the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. And then we continue to assess what are the additional potential renewable energy options in terms of energy efficiency and electrification that can be further deployed for an accelerated energy transformation while also considering other low carbon technologies. From there, a REmap case is developed. It is an assertive yet technically and economically feasible pathway for the deployment of low carbon technology, largely based on renewable energy and energy efficiency. So this considers what are the resources available, the access to finance, and the environmental policies that exist in place. So from there, we come up with a cost-benefit analysis of having a REmap case versus the reference case in terms of its deployment, investments, the system costs, the job creations, and the avoided externalities, in particular the CO2 emissions. This presentation outlines the role of wind and solar energy and the deployment needed to be well below the 2 Celsius towards 1.5 degrees Celsius to achieve the Paris climate goals. As we launch into a new decade, it is clear that the conversation around cleaner and sustainable energy transitions is becoming more important. In achieving these transitions, there are several drivers for energy transformation. The first and most important one for IRENA is to reduce energy-related carbon CO2 emissions. In light of climate change and its increasingly visible impact throughout the globe, there is an ever more pressing need to shift away from fossil fuels towards cleaner, renewable forms of energy and limit our carbon emissions in line with the NDCs and Paris Agreement. Renewable energy is also cheaper. The global weighted average cost from all the commercially available generation technologies has rapidly continued to decline for the past decade and is expected to fall further. It's now more competitive, especially for solar and wind, which I will show you in the coming slides. The energy transformation drives also have significant socio-economic benefits. Development of a local renewable energy industry has the potential to create jobs and also improve air quality and reduction of climate impacts. Lastly, this transformation would increase energy security and enhance universal 100% energy access. All these energy transformation drivers are based on our report, the Global Energy Transformation GET report, the 3rd edition, which was launched earlier this year. We will also launch another edition this year, this March, which will cover the regional transitional pathways. So now I will show you what are the strong business case for wind and solar, the cost. As mentioned, the renewable energy cost has continued to fall rapidly in the past decade. This figure here shows the LCOE and the global weighted average cost of onshore wind, solar PV, offshore, and CSP. This is based on the IRENA Renewable Energy Database cost, based on the project-specific install cost, the install capacity, and the capacity factors. IRENA's upcoming costing report will be launched this year on the cost reduction potential for solar and wind for 2030, and will provide a more detailed discussion on the total install cost. As you can see, this is the cost reductions expected for wind technology for both onshore and offshore wind in the coming 3 decades. The LCOE of onshore wind is already competitive with all fossil fuel generation sources and expected to further decline from 6 cents in 2018 to between 3 to 5 cents in 2030 to 2 to 3 cents in 2050. For offshore wind, there is currently a lot of technological improvements being made. It is already competitive in Europe, with Germany and Netherlands taking the lead, but will be more competitive in other parts of the globe by 2030. Increasing the economy of scale by having competitive supply chains and further technological improvements will continue to further reduce the cost of wind power. And then we go to the solar PV installation costs and the LCOEs. As we can see, it's already competitive compared to all fossil fuel generation sources and is expected to decline further as install costs and performance continue to improve. Globally, the LCOE for solar will continue to fall from 8.5 cents per kilowatt hour in 2018 to between 2 to 8 cents by 2030 and 1.4 to 5 cents by 2050. And now I will pass on to Elisa to further elaborate on the pathways for wind and solar PV for a REmap case.
Thank you, Maisarah. Good morning, everyone. Of course, achieving the Paris climate goals would require a significant acceleration across a range of sectors and technologies. Wind and solar PV would represent the largest power generation sources and lead the way for the transformation of the global electricity sector. Wind would generate 35% of total electricity needs globally, while solar PV would generate 25%, becoming prominent generation sources by 2050. However, such transformation is only possible by significantly scaling up wind and solar PV capacities in the next 3 decades. For onshore wind, this entails increasing global cumulative install capacity 9-fold by 2050. While for offshore wind power, the global cumulative install capacity would increase substantially towards 2050, with the total offshore installation nearing 1,000 gigawatts by 2050. While there is adequate supply to increase the technology, the wind industry would need to be prepared for such significant growth in the market over the next 3 decades. In annual growth terms, onshore wind would increase more than 4-fold to more than 200 gigawatts per year in the next 20 years, while an even higher growth would be required in annual offshore wind capacity additions, around a 10-fold increase to 45 gigawatts per year by 2050. In regional terms, for both onshore and offshore wind, Asia would continue to dominate the power industry, with more than half of the global installations by 2050, followed by Europe and North America. For the offshore industry, innovation is key. And in this sense, floating offshore is potentially a game-changing technology that could multiply the offshore wind potential, covering between 5 and 15% of global offshore capacities by 2050. Similar to wind, solar PV capacity is expected to grow almost 18 times, reaching 8,519 gigawatts by 2050. And this, similar to wind, in annual growth terms, would entail an almost 3-fold rise in yearly solar PV capacity additions by 2030, and a 4-fold rise by 2050 compared to 2018 levels. At a regional level, Asia and mostly China would continue to dominate the solar PV power in terms of installed capacity, followed by North America and Europe. The Latin American market is another important market that would also grow significantly in the next 3 decades. Indeed, in order to accelerate the growth of installations over the coming decades, scaling up wind and solar PV energy investment is critical. Average annual investments for wind, onshore wind, would reach more than $200 billion per year by 2050, while for offshore wind, this would be $100 billion. Similarly, also solar PV would entail more than $190 billion for total installations. However, besides investments for capacity, accommodating such variable power would require investments in grids, generation adequacy, and some flexibility measures, such as storage across the entire electricity system. According to IRENA REmap, these would total $13 trillion for the period between 2016 and 2050 by 2050. Near 2/3 of the incremental investment are needed for extending or enhancing transmission and distribution grids, while the remaining investments are needed for adequacy and flexibility measures, including storage of the power system, along subsequent investment in smart meter deployment. Solar PV and wind are also key technologies contributing to emission reductions. An accelerated deployment of wind and PV coupled with electrification can contribute close to a half of emission reductions needed. Both the wind and solar PV industry, the expansion of solar and PV industry will also bring socio-economic benefits with significant job creations. It's important to note that, particularly for the offshore wind, education and skills policies can allow for the retention and reallocation of existing expertise in the oil and gas sector to support the installation of offshore wind foundation structures. And finally, of course, unleashing the massive potential of wind and solar PV is crucial to achieve climate targets, and mitigating existing barriers immediately through a wide range of supportive policies and implementation measures, including innovative business models, financial instruments, is vital to boost future deployment of solar PV and wind capacity to enable the transition to a low carbon and sustainable energy future. Some of the challenges for the wind are, for instance, grid access, public acceptance, planning procedure and planning uncertainties, while for solar we also have grid integration, grid flexibility, but also economies of scales, access to finance, and lack of standards. So indeed, major takeaways of today's presentation is that the energy transformation is technically feasible and economically it makes economic sense, and its benefits significantly outweigh its costs. Solar PV and wind are crucial to meet climate targets, and together, indeed, it is possible to shape a sustainable and more prosperous energy future. The publications on which this presentation was based on are available on our website. These are the Global Energy Transformation, the 2019 edition, the Future of Wind, and the Future of Solar PV. Thank you very much for your attention. Of course, other studies are available on our website, and if you have any further questions, please contact the REmap team at the address displayed on the slide. Martina, I will hand the mic back to you.
Thank you, Elisa. Thank you both, Maisarah and Elisa, for a very insightful presentation. We have few questions already being asked by the audience, but let me break the ice with my own question. I was wondering, what is the role and potential of distributed solar PVs?
Thank you, Martina. So while currently the market is largely dominated by utility scale solar, the deployment of distributed PV systems has increased significantly in recent years, in great measures thanks to supporting policies such as net metering, fiscal incentives, and in some markets, PV is becoming more attractive for an economic point of view than buying electricity directly from the grid. The competitiveness of distributed solar is evident in some large markets such as Brazil, China, Germany, and Mexico. But there are, however, some important differences between countries which could highlight the future improvement potential. At the global level, the REmap analysis expects that around 60% of solar PV capacity by 2050 would be utility scale, while the remaining 40% would be distributed. While utility scale projects will still be predominant in 2050, the REmap analysis expects that distributed installations will grow, and thanks to all the policies and supportive measures.
Thank you. I would like to encourage attendees to ask more questions. I received two more for now. One is, Asia is clearly dominating the scene for offshore wind development. What are the key markets in the region expected to dominate the global offshore wind power installation by 2050? I guess it's the question for any of you. Thank you.
Okay. As mentioned during the PowerPoint, Europe would continue to dominate offshore wind installations, as you can see with the North Sea, for the next decade or so, but it will soon be outpaced by Asia with significant offshore wind. As you can see, like for the next few years, you have Vietnam, China really expanding their offshore wind, mostly also in India, in Taipei, Korea, Japan, and Indonesia for the next 3 decades. In China, the installed capacity of wind would reach around 56 gigawatts by 2030 and 382 gigawatts by 2050. It would dominate the whole of the offshore wind installations. Thank you.
Thank you. There are now popping up quite a lot of questions. I would ask another one. The integration of variable renewable energy resources, such as wind and solar PV, creates key challenges to the grid and the energy system. What are the possible, or where do you see the possible solutions to mitigate these challenges?
Okay, I'll take this one. Definitely, flexibility is a key solution to effectively manage large-scale variable renewable energy. Flexibility must be harnessed in all sectors of the energy system, from power generation to transmission and distribution systems. Some of the possible solutions include storage, both electrical and thermal, flexible demand through demand-side management, electric vehicles, which are leading the way to unleash synergies between low-carbon transport modes and renewable energy electricity generation, and also contributing to sector coupling. We also have hydrogen, power to X. Yeah.
Thank you. So unfortunately, the time is up and I will have to close the Q&A session. So let me thank today's speaker for their captivating presentation and for great questions from the audience. And we hope that these insights which were shared today are of a great value to all of you. Let me share with you a few final announcements. So to be able to reflect on the delivery of our webinar and the ways to improve it, we would appreciate your feedback. So we would like to invite you to complete a very short satisfactory survey, which will appear at the end of the webinar, and which will be shared with you also in the follow-up emails. Well, thank you in advance for filling it up. And last but not least, we would like to invite you to all our next edition of this webinar series, which will be on electric vehicles and how smartly should we charge them. It will take place in 2 weeks' time, again on Tuesday, on 21st of February 2020 at 10 a.m. Central European Time. You can already register on IRENA website, and the link will be again shared with you in our follow-up email. Once again, thank you all for attending this webinar session. Goodbye and see you soon.